the first debugging Saturday, I've chosen to examine Postman, a desktop app that you use when you want to build a Rails API. This post will review Postman for Mac OS, but there's a Windows version too, and you can reasonably follow along if you're using the Windows version as well. The latest version of Postman comes with some annoying adware and upsells, but you can get started with the basics for no cost. Okay, first you're going to need to download Postman from the website. Here I've already got it in my downloads history. As you can see under the downloads, Postman, right? And then I do show in Finder, put it in here. Now here they're going to make you sign in with an account. I'm actually going to say skip signing in and take me straight to the app. And this is what it looks like when it first comes into view. It says good afternoon, because it's the afternoon right now. And it gives you options to see your history, collections, and APIs. It also gives you the option, the buttons here, create a request, create a collection, create an environment. Today we're only going to recover requests. And to do this, we're going to need to look here where it says the plus icon right here next to Launchpad. We can actually close Launchpad. If I hit plus, it'll open up a new request. It says here untitled request. By default, the untitled request will be a GET request. Okay, today we're going to cover how to send requests to Postman. Specifically, we're going to cover how to send JSON requests. That's JavaScript Object Notation, to our local development server. Our local development server will respond under certain conditions. Think of Postman as though it, that is Postman, and by extension you as the operator of Postman, acts in place of a third-party app that is accessing your API. Alternatively, you can test an API you are writing in Rails for a mobile or client app. A request means a call or an ask and respond cycle that is 1. Sent over HTTP or HTTPS. 2. Is for a specific type of format, that is HTML, JSON, JavaScript, XML. And 3 is made from a client to a server for a specific Uniform Resource Indicator, or URI. A URI is what you commonly refer to as a URL. But in the context of APIs, we call it a Uniform Resource Indicator because URI, or Uniform Resource Indicator, is more general than URL, which stands for Uniform Resource Locator. Conceptually, they are pretty much the same thing. Okay, today we're going to use an endpoint that is just going to be very simple. It's going to be HTTP ://localhost:3000. That means port 3000 running on our local machine. And then we're going to have /things.json. So in this example, we're going to ask the local host simply to return the endpoint things.json. Okay, to test it out, you'll see that we need a Rails app, of course. I have a very simple one running here. It just has a model thing with nothing in it that descends from the application record, and it has a things controller that descends from the application controller. This is a Rails 6 app. And we're going to add some content to make our Rails server respond correctly. Here's our Rails server. We can run it with BE Rails S for BE Rails server. Yep, just let it fire up. And if we open in our browser now 127.0.0.1 3000things.json, you'll see it says unknown action index could not be found on the things controller. When we send a request to things.json, we expect to get back a JSON array of things in our Rails app. The request has the key components discussed above and 2 more. The headers, which operate automatically in the transmission between the client and the server, and the parameters. finally, to incorporate a sixth dimension, each request has an HTTP method, which are any of get, post, put, patch, or options. Although in Rails, we don't actually use options. In other words, let's consider all the parts of the request in this exercise. Rails handles all of this on the back end for you, thankfully, making it easily available to your controller. We won't go over that today, but the code that makes this work is pretty straightforward, and I will show you that now. Headers. Headers are typically used for authentication in the context of an API key, which the user either retains indefinitely or the front-end code maintains as a logged-in, logged-out state for the API key. Now, a small tangent on the naming of your API key. Before 2011, it was common to see an X dash in front of a custom, that is, non-standard header in some apps. That is, if you were implementing an API header for your own app, passing an API key, you might have chosen to call it X-API-key. The X prefix in the header was used in the early days of web development and the early days of Ajax to differentiate it from a quote-unquote standard header. However, you no longer need to use the X dash prefix in your header names. That's because the W3C, that's the body that decides the standards, decided that there was no such important difference between your header names and any standard ones. So just drop the X dash and call it API key, or whatever else describes it for you in your app. That's because the W3C, or the organizational body that decides on the standards, decided that there was no such important difference between your header names and any standard ones. So you can just drop the X dash and call it API key, or whatever else describes it for you in your app. Now, a brief interlude. If you're going to have a client-side API key, that is, you're giving each client a token for them to hold on to, you're probably going to skip forgery protection. Let's look at what that looks like right now. So the first thing to note is that Rails produces for every form a CSRF token. It expects that this token is received by the user in HTML and then sent back. So if you're not going to use that token, that is, if you're going to bypass that security measure, you're probably doing this for an open API, an API in which you don't care about CSRF protection. There'll be another course on CSRF protection and why you should use it, but for today, we're covering Postman, and generally, for an API, if it's an open API, you don't need CSRF protection. So here, the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to say skip forgery protection right here in my controller, and that looks like this, skip forgery protection. Now, the reason that I'm going to skip forgery protection is because I'm going to implement a security mechanism instead. We're actually going to implement an API key. We're going to assume that once the client, that is the end user, has the API key, that they are the only ones who are going to have that API key. So in our example, we're going to pass the API key along with the headers, but we're going to get to that in just 1 second. It says unknown action. The action index could not be found on the things controller. That's because we have neither a route nor an index. Let's fix that right now. I'm going to go to the routes file. Let's fix the routing error. First, we're going to go to routes.rb, and we're going to do resources, and then we're going to do things, just like that, okay? We're going to hit save, and then I'm going to switch back into Chrome and reload the page, things.json. You'll notice I'm doing this in Chrome right now. Actually, let's do it in Postman, because this lecture is on Postman. Let me stop myself, open up Postman here. We're going to say things.json, we're going to hit it, and it's going to say, it's a little bit harder to read in Postman, but look, voila, action controller exception caught. Look, that's what it looks like in Postman. It's the CSS of what you see when you see the error in Chrome. That's what it looks like in Postman, and now I'll show it to you in Chrome. Okay? Things.json, right? Unknown action, the action index could not be found on the things controller. That's because I don't have an action index on the things controller. So there I just showed you the very first thing with Postman. That's a bare naked request. It has no parameters. It has no headers. It's just a GET request. These are all of the different kinds of requests. Look, all these different kinds of requests here. And when we send it, it just sends back the error. Okay, now we're going to fix the problem here by adding to our things controller an index. All right, and in this case, we're going to just have things equals thing.all, and then, oops, that's not what I want. Sorry about the type ahead. Respond to do format, just like that. Format JSON, because we only want to respond to JSON in this example. Render, and here we just pass render an associative array. The associative array happens to just be JSON as a symbol, and then things, and then we call the method as JSON on the things that we loaded. Remember, we just loaded all the things from the database. That's all we did. I'm going to clean up my code just a little bit here. Okay, that's it. Now let's go back to Postman, and we're going to reload. Send. Whoa! Look who had some things in the database already. I didn't tell you about that part. Apple, name is name Apple. Category is fruit. It has a created at and an updated at. ID 2, name banana. Category fruit. GET requests are used by endpoints to query for lists and to query against, for example, a URL where the ID of the thing is part of the URL. For example, with a small modification to this controller, we can use the edit route to query for just a single item. Def edit instance thing equals model thing dot find params respond to do format JSON render JSON thing as JSON. In other words, we want to have both an edit and a list or index endpoint for this API. Now our URI will be 127.0.0.1:3000 /things/1/edit.json. If we hit the server now, that is, if we send a request to the server now with Postman, we get just the Apple record, because the Apple record is the one that corresponds to the ID of 1. Notice that up until this point, we've not used any query parameters and only used GET parameters. Making a request with Postman that isn't a GET request. In any RESTful application, you should follow the rules of HTTP verbs. The rules are as follows. To create an object, use a POST method. To read an object, use a GET method. To update an object, you're going to use a put or a patch method. To delete an object, you're going to use the delete method. That's what you do. Don't make up your own verbs for defining routes. In Rails, we did this already when we defined resources things in our routes.rb file. When we did that, we got these 4 CRUD, or create, read, update, delete, actions along with the index action automatically. You can examine the routes with bundle exec rake routes. For our simple GET request that returned a list of things above, we had no parameters. That's okay, we didn't need any. To understand how to make a POST request, we'll also need to understand how parameters work. Making a Postman request with parameters. Now, with Postman, switch your method to post and change the URI back to the index view 127.0.0.1/things JSON. Not so fast, cowboy. You need to give Rails the data for the thing that you want to create in the parameters. Now, because of the way that Rails interprets the data, you need to actually pass thing and then use brackets, square brackets, thing, square bracket name, and then apple, and then thing, square bracket category, and then fruit. Now you hit send, and look at how that turns out on the Rails server. You see that Rails has interpreted the square brackets and turned it into a thing parameter that it points to or is an associative array. That associative array is made up of two other objects, name and category. You see in your Rails app that the new thing is sent. Now, you can use parameters with either get or post, but above all, just remember that with post, your parameters are sent in the body of your request, and with get, you'll see them in the query section by the URL. Let's quickly review how to pass a header. Do not confuse headers with parameters. They are different. Headers operate automatically in the HTTP transmission. Like parameters, they can communicate information from the client to the server. Unlike parameters, they can also let the server respond with information too. You'll note also that headers are a native part of the HTTP protocol, whereas parameters are a construction of your app, and that is Rails, that is created between the client and the server when it's doing its request and response. Our new header, we'll call it API key. That's what we're going to name our new header. In Postman, you'll want to switch into the Headers tab and add API key. And here we're going to add the API key. I'm going to give you a secret that the API key is the full 26 letters of the alphabet, but we're going to get to that in a second. First, let's go back to our Rails application and add some code to our controller. We need to add this code to our things controller. We already have skip forgery protection. We're going to leave that there. And we're going to add def authenticate access API key equals request.headers and then square braces and then pass the string API key. And there's the magic. Rails handles all of those headers for you. It just takes them in and makes it available to your controller at request.headers, just like that. Now, we're going to assume that we already have an account set up, that is an account model set up, and that the account model has a string API key. So we're going to make that assumption, and we're going to say if not account.where API key is API key, and because of the way active relation works, we're going to do any. If there are no accounts with this API key, we're going to raise account not authorized, and we're going to get to that account not authorized in a second. To do this correctly, we'll actually need to add a little bit more Rails magic to handle the authentication. You can authenticate your user any way that you'd like. In other words, while there are many ways to implement authentication, I am doing something similar to the basic way shown in the Rails guides here. You can find the link in the examples. To do this correctly, we'll actually need to add a little more Rails magic here to handle the authentication. You can authenticate your user in any way you like. While there are many ways to implement authentication, I am doing something similar to the basic way shown in the Rails guides here. Handling the exception. First, move up to your application controller and add the method that will handle the exception, like so. Class application controller descends from action controller base. You should already have that. We're going to make a private method, def account not authorized. First, we'll set the flash error to equal you do not have access to this section. And then we'll respond to format both JSON and HTML, just because I like to respond to both. When we respond to the JSON, we'll render JSON, response, then the flash message, the flash error message. And when we respond to HTML, we'll just render the flash error message without a layout. This is usually in your app you would render with a layout, but in this example app, I'm just going to say layout equals false. Now, go back down to your things controller and add rescue from account not authorized with account not authorized. It's a little redundant, but just take a look at how it looks. This is so that your new things controller will look like this. Skip forgery protection, before action, authenticate access, rescue from, account not authorized as an object with account not authorized that points to the method in the application controller that we defined earlier. After that, switch back to Postman and let's give it a whirl. Notice that we'll first try with no headers. Go ahead and hit send the send button, and notice how Rails tells you that you aren't authorized. Don't, because you didn't pass it an API key. You'll notice that what it says, response, you are not authorized to this section, is exactly, you don't have access to this section, is exactly what we said for it to say in the account not authorized method that we define when we define the flash error. Let's drop into our Rails console with bundle exec Rails C and make a new account using account.create, API key, and then give it A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. I hope I know my alphabet. So now we have a new account that's created just for this purpose. We go back to Postman in the headers. We make sure to set the API key to etc., ABC, etc. Now we hit send, again with the API key set, and Bob's your uncle, you get a valid response. There you go, that's it. We've covered GET requests, POST requests, we've covered parameters and headers. I hope you've enjoyed this debugging session with Postman. In conclusion, Postman is a great tool, especially when you are working with JSON responses, and most modern APIs do. Getting used to Postman as an alternative to your browser is a skill that every new Rails developer should take on. So good luck with Postman, good luck debugging, and I hope to see you again next time at the Rails Coach. Thanks for joining today.